This is Quideo number 4. The basic question. The Census Bureau reports that households spend an average of 31% of their total spending on housing. A home builders association in Cleveland believes that this average is lower in their area. They interviewed a sample of 40 households in the Cleveland metropolitan area to learn what percent of their spending goes towards housing. The population standard deviation is 9.6%, and the HO is that the mean is equal to 31%, and the HA is that the mean is less than 31%. And for part A, we had to find the sampling distribution of the mean percent X bar that the sample spends on housing if the null hypothesis is true. And so it's normal at 31% and 1.518%. And to get the 1.518%, we had to take the standard deviation over the square root of n, which is 9.6 over the square root of 40, which gives you 1.518%. And then for B, we had to explain in simple language why one result is good evidence that average Cleveland spending on housing is less than 31%. And that's because a lower percentage lies out in the low tail of the curve, while 30.2% is fairly close to the middle. We have to assume the HO is true. Observing a value like 30.2% would be surprising, but 27.6 is unlikely, and therefore provides evidence against the HO. And then here are the calculations, or whether to fail to reject the HO or reject the HO. And then for part C, we had to shade the area under the curve that gives the p-value for the result x bar equals 30.2%. And that's that area. And then also for part B, we had to mark 27.6% and 30.2% on the density curve. For the advanced question, Pew Research in November 2011 pulled a random sample of 799 U.S. teens about internet use. 49% of those teens reported that they had misrepresented their age online to gain access to websites and online services. For part A, we had to find the margin of error for this poll if we want 95% confidence in our estimate of the percent of American teens who have misrepresented their age online. And so we did that by taking the z-star over the square root of p and then 1 minus p over n. And the z-star was 1.96 for the 95% confidence interval. So then there's the calculation, and our answer is 0.035. And for B, we had to explain what the margin of error means in context, and that's that we can be 95% confident that the true proportion of teens admitted to misrepresenting their ages online lies between 0.49 plus or minus the margin of error equals 0.49 minus 0.035, which is equal to 0.4555, and then 0.49 plus 0.035 equals 0.525. And then for C, if we only need to be 90% confident, will the margin of error be larger or smaller? At a 90% confidence interval, the margin of error will be smaller. Being willing to accept a lower confidence interval means we can pin down the mean proportion more closely. The margin of error is smaller because the interval is narrower. For the AP question, each person in a random sample of 1,026 adults in the United States was asked the following question. Based on what you know about the Social Security system today, would you like Congress and the President to do during this next year? And then here are the response choices and the percentages. And so for part A, we had to find a 95% confidence interval for the proportion of all United States adults who would respond make some major changes to the question, and give an interpretation of the confidence interval and an interpretation of the confidence level. And so it requires a large population and a large sample. And so the interval is between 0.3602 to 0.4198. And there's the confidence interval calculation, which is done by p hat plus and minus the z-star, and then the square root of p hat 1 minus p hat over n. And so then we are 95% confident that the proportion of all U.S. adults who would respond make some changes is between 0.36 and 0.42. In the long run, 95% of the intervals generated using this method will contain the population proportion. And then for part B, an advocate for leaving the system as it is now commented, based on this poll, only 39% of adults in the sample responded that they want some major changes made to the system, while 41% responded that they only want minor changes or no changes at all. Therefore, we should not change the system. And we had to explain why this statement, while technically correct, is misleading. The advocate is claiming that we should not change the system on the basis of adding the 30% who want to make some minor adjustments to the 11% who want to leave the system the way it is now. It is misleading to claim that these 30% don't want to change the system. In addition to the 39% who wanted major change, 19% wanted a complete overhaul of the system. These two groups combined represent 50% over half of the sample.